Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Percona, Satori, and Rubrik. I'm Stephen Fegg, Director of Database Trends and Applications and Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Data Security and Governance for the AI Era. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the submit button. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible later. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, we're very excited to have with us Charlie Batista, PostgreSQL Tech Lead at Percona, Eric Shepfley, Data Enablement Solutions at Satori, and Michael Fall, Database Practice Lead at Rubrik. Each speaker today is going to give a quick presentation, and then we're going to dive into a group discussion on today's topic. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the event over to Charlie to get us started. Welcome to the broadcast, Charlie.
All right. Thanks, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and talk about database and the hot topic that is AI today. And definitely something that is very important is security, and that we do not often see people talking about, especially on the AI, right? But before we start, I would like to introduce Percona. Percona is a database company that's been founded in 2006 by Peter Zaitsev and Vadim Tkachenko. They are former MySQL employees. And the company that started with MySQL has grown along of those more than 15 years and embraced many other technologies. As of today, we work with MySQL, obviously, which was our first technology that we started working. We also work with MongoDB and PostgreSQL. Percona is a very distributed company. We have more than 300 employees as of today that works in all continents. We are across more than 50 countries today. So we definitely are in, if not in all of the majority of time zones as of today. As of today, Percona has been really a growth in the market share, and we do take very serious the transparency. So every year we try to we listen to our customers. So we try to improve to see what the customers and the market sees as the best as we do, and obviously what we do as a poorly. So we are very knowing the market to be very reliable and also to be very strong on performance. So when people usually hear from Percona, they always associate Percona and database performance. And this is one of the things that you also take in our blog. So we have the Percona blog that we have thousands of access every month. And where we discuss about trends, database performance, and everything database related. We also have what makes Percona unique is a commitment that we have for the open source. The software that we have today, they are truly open source. So we do have our own distribution for MySQL, for MongoDB, and for Postgres. And we do ship enterprise-grade software like backups for MySQL and backups for MongoDB is an enterprise-grade. Our Percona distribution for Postgres also has an enterprise-grade. And not only that, they are truly open source. And they work not only, they work on most of the cloud provider. And what can we get from Percona? So from Percona, you can get consulting, so managed service. If you have your company and you do not want to spend time with DBAs, and usually DBAs tend to be very annoying people, I know because I am a DBA, so you can work with Percona, so we can manage your database for you. We can also provide support and training as well. And as I said, our software are all three of them open source, and they work as a drop-in replacement. We work on most of the cloud providers as of today. So meaning we do work on Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and many other cloud providers. So that's really easy to integrate the software that Percona distributes. Also, we do work on most of the platforms. So we do work, our software works is on Red Hat, Ubuntu, and Debian. So you get full support for those platforms. We distribute software for all of the majority of the Linux, so the ones that you do not hear as fully supported, we can also be easily integrated as well. And as I said, we do work with the major cloud providers. So you can work on Kubernetes. We have native integration with Kubernetes. So we have distribution of MySQL, MongoDB, and Postgres for the major flavors of Kubernetes. And those are some of our key values. We really are proud to be true open source. We are proud to be multi-database ready, so you can navigate the landscape of multiple databases. So we try to innovate as fast as we can and deploy anywhere. Those are 4 major keys from Percona. That's that I would like to say thank you, and that's on you, Eric.
Happy to be back on one of these awesome webinars. So my name is Eric Sheffley. I work at a company called Satori. If you're not familiar with us, we are a data security platform. We focus on providing and controlling secure access to data. I am one of the earlier employees here, so I do wear quite a lot of hats. Been here about 3 years, and largely my role involves dealing with customers, understanding the requirements they have around data security, data governance, and helping them get there through our partnership. Now, for the topic of the webinar today, something that I've been heavily focused on throughout this year, starting late last year, was working with our customers, their security teams and governance teams, and really understanding how are you getting ready for your organization's adoption of Gen AI and other AI solutions as they revolve around data. Through those conversations, we were starting to see that there's a trend emerging around how organizations are concerned around the implications of adopting Gen AI. I've kind of captured these in 3 points here. One is how are organizations going to control what data is being accessed by AI, both the models and applications that are leveraging it. 2, how do they prevent sensitive data from being exposed to users that are not otherwise authorized to see that data? And then finally, how are organizations going to maintain visibility and control over data usage as they onboard new technologies and new tools around this? Now, there's a positive way to look at this, which is none of this is really a new concern for organizations. If you have a strategy in place around your analytics and big data, this is where you've already kind of started to answer some of these questions. But number 2 is kind of a more concerning thing, which is a lot of organizations already have an overwhelming number of access patterns that they're having to deal with. So this is different teams, business units in the organization are consuming data in new ways. They're using new technologies, and it's becoming very hard for organizations to stay on top of all the ways in which data is being accessed and consumed. Now, for a lot of organizations, that's probably a generally true statement, but there's 2 scenarios where when they overlap, we start to see this becoming a very kind of critical concern. I'll move a little bit closer to the mic. I'm hearing it's a little bit quiet. So those 2 scenarios for where this is a big priority for organizations is when you have, 1, a lot of focus on adopting new AI and data use cases, trying to find new ways to be competitive, mixed with an increasing level of security and compliance requirements around how data is used. Those can be based on the organizations that you're, or the industry that you work in, or the regions that you operate in, such as the GDPR controlled area. We're seeing more kind of legislation around that through Africa and South America as well. And there's obviously a number of concerns related to the complexity that comes from those 2 scenarios. But number 1 for this is a lot of organizations are having to put a halt on adoption of data and AI projects because they cannot answer these concerns around how is data being used? How do we report on that? How do we go through these audit motions in a reliable fashion? So really where Satori fits in this is that kind of guideline that I discussed of whether it's AI, whether it's data, whether it's engineering, is putting a central guideline in place on how can we write rules around what data is able to be accessed under what circumstances? How do we audit on that behavior? And how do we kind of make sure that that same security controls are in place across every application and database in use? So as I mentioned, Satori is a data security platform, one solution to handle that. There are other areas, but this is a growing solution category. So hopefully that was helpful in getting a quick overview of where Satori fits in this discussion. I'll hand it over to Michael now to introduce himself and Rubric.
All right. Am I coming on? All right, good. Sorry, folks, having a few technical difficulties on the back end, but appreciate your patience. Again, my name is Mike Fall with Rubric, and really here to talk about, obviously all the data stuff, the data security, which is a chief focus here at Rubric. Rubric is a cyber recovery and resilience platform, been around for a few years, and really trying to solve that conflux of data and security that is becoming more and more of an issue nowadays. I can move slides. Don't worry, I'm good. So where I want to start with this, with talking about what Rubric is, over the past few years, obviously everybody's seen all the stories about ransomware, all data breaches, and the various conversations that are going around it. And what we've seen with our own research is people are spending more and more money on security and trying to, build wider moats and higher walls and trying to put that protection. But ransomware is still a problem, and it's not going away. And a lot of it has to do with just the odds are stacked against you as far as trying to secure your data around that, because frankly, if you're protecting data, you need to be on 100% of the time. And the attackers need one victory, and then suddenly they've got access to your data and they can cause a lot of damage. So with Rubric, we wanted to build a platform because the way we look at it, it's not necessarily a question of if, it's a question of when. And when happens becomes increasingly problematic, whereas before, if there was a major disaster, it's like, okay, well, how long does it take for us to recreate our servers? How long does it take for us to run our restores? Get the data populated back into the environment. Well, with Rubric, with the event of the cyber attacks, well, now we have more question answers, like what was the scope of the attack? Where was it infected, right? At what point did an infection hit within the system? Because that infection point might be there for days, if not weeks, before the attack actually occurs, right? Also, what data was impacted? We need to be more and more cognizant of what's in our environments and then how do we address that. And then finally, like before we can restore, we need to make sure we've identified those attack vectors, those payloads, quarantine them so that when we do recover, we don't reinfect ourselves. So obviously, this is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge. And if we look at the legacy platforms over the last 20, 30 years, they really weren't designed with this in mind, where I might have a backup solution that resides, that's software-based. And then I have my storage platform, and the backup software and the storage platform are communicating with each other. And it's done in a way that, well, both sides have to essentially trust each other in order to work. Well, with Rubric, we wanted to build a different way. And so what we created was a single platform where we're consolidating all the data and the metadata around your backups. All the operations are in one place in this logically air-gapped architecture that gives you the security around making sure your backups are protected. But then on top of that, we're adding this ability to then scan that and look for threats. So you don't have multiple pieces and parts trying to manage this. You're actually getting everything consolidated into one place. And this offers up several advantages, right? Making it easier for you to determine the scope of the attack, making it easier for you to determine that point of infection because we're looking at all that data in a consolidated place with that threat engine. And then, using that to assess your impact, quarantine the malware, and then actually finally do the recovery, right? It's all encompassed in one place. And it's really that sort of packaging of everything that we see as the gap in the current structure. And, it's one of those things about backups, right? Everybody's like, oh, backups, we need them. But they're almost always a secondary thought because they're fairly tedious and we've had just sort of a way that's worked. And so that's one of the things that we see as this gap and this opportunity around data security is how do we address that and make it in a way that when you do get hit with that ransomware attack, how do you recover quickly? How do you get your data back? And how do you do it in a way that minimally impacts the business? So that's really what I wanted to kind of go over as far as Rubrik and what we're doing and why we're in the marketplace around this stuff. With that, Stephen, I think we're going to go into questions.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Michael. So we're going to bring everyone up on the screen and dive into our group discussion questions for today. Charlie, I'm going to let you lead off hit for us on the first question. So the first question is, databases play a crucial role in supporting AI systems. How can organizations better enhance database security in the AI era?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, right? So usually when we talk about improving security, the first thing that comes to our mind is to put layers of protection, just like Mark was talking about, right? So you want to build that wall or that bridge that behind around your database, that people cannot get access to your database. But what people often forget about is that maybe the threat that comes from inside, right? So usually what happens when you have a database leak or problem, security on your database, more often than we would like to have is not from an external attack. The problem started inside of the organization, right? So, and people often forget about those things. And in that sense, it's pointless if you have that huge wall surrounding your database, if you have internal attack, right? And obviously, it doesn't mean that we should not have all of this data encryption, like data encryption at rest, data encryption at transport, like TLS, all those kind of stuff. We like implementing role-based access control. So those are all the things that we always think about those. But then when it comes to AI, things go beyond of protecting access. So what are the guarantees that the access that we gave to the application doesn't go beyond what we want, what we have, what we would like to, right? So it probably we're going to have questions about data guarantees later, but we also need to think about those things. So it's like what Eric was talking about on all the regulations that we have, like GDPR and all those kind of regulations. They are also thinking about security. Okay, let's forget about attacks on the database. Let's say we granted access to an application, but we give certain level of access to that application. What are the guarantees that we have that the application wouldn't go beyond what the access that we gave to that application? What are the guarantees that we have that the data that we gave to the application won't be breached, right? And especially when it comes to AI, like we need to start training the AIs, all those models and things, we need to start training those AIs. How can we secure the data in a way that you can still train your AI that can be useful, but the data won't be breached? Because one thing that we need to learn is once the AI is being trained, it doesn't forget about the information. We need to train it again, right? It will not forget. So you need to purge all of those things. So, and then things that we need to think about is all on top of all that wall that we put, now we need to start about thinking about data masking, right? So how can you prevent that over accessing the data that's being granted? Right? So we need okay, how can we mask the data in a way that is still valuable for the application, but the application doesn't have access to private information, for example. And it comes for research. Okay, we have a medical research that's going to be really valuable for all the society, but I don't want to give away my personal information. I want to still anonymize, right? Those are really huge challenges that we have around of those things, that they are part of all the security and the governance of the data, right? And we usually forget about those. We always think about the ransomware. I don't want my data to be overprotected in a way that I cannot be accessed. Ransomware is the overkill layer of protection, right? So once they get your data encrypted, nobody can access. So we don't want our data to be on that level of security. But we still need to have the layers of guarantees that the data are going to be useful, but will not leak, in a sense, right? I think this is a huge challenge that we have today. And that's why we have so many regulations, right? And things that zero trust. Okay, I don't trust anybody. So I'm going to build an API here that I'm going to only give you the very limited amount of data that you really need to do for your research, for example. Right. So, oh no, we're gonna start anonymizing the data. Okay, you have access to all the data that I have, but they're in a way public. Obviously, but more. It's not so simplistic, but you get the idea, right? So we start building those. I think the blocks we start building on top of what we already have today, because one thing is what Mike was been talking about. Yeah, we still need our database to be protected. We don't want anybody else from outside to get access to the database. But then we have what Eric was talking about, right? So even the people that should have access to that data, they need to use that data in a way that is still secure. And they can still get all the value that those things. I think making them working together, like this combination, is a really huge challenge that we have today.
That's a great point, Charlie. Eric, I'd love your viewpoint on this.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I love your answer there, Charlie. I think you're spot on. A big thing that I really challenge organizations to think about is start moving the mentality around data-centric security. I don't think you can replace the need for traditional and growing approaches around database security, but when you look at the reality of most organizations, you see there's not a singular database where data is coming in, especially the move to AI where you're pulling data from more locations that might be coming from outside of what we typically think of as your standard database, right? It could be coming from applications, it could be data lake. You need to have considerations for how do each of those technologies handle security, and focusing it just on that technology and platform base, it kind of limits your ability to sync all those together. So we challenge you to kind of separate that one layer and say, okay, regardless of where the data exists, what is the context in which this should be used? How should it be exposed? Do we need to have controls over, maybe some kind of information like an address or a phone number itself might not be PII, but if it's combined with other information, how do we control that differently? And how do we do it in a way that's not overly restrictive, right? I mean, I think the big push that we're seeing and why organizations are so hungry to adopt AI is because of the speed at which you can innovate, the speed at which you can use things. That doesn't mean we can't think about security, but it needs to be guidelines for the organization to say, hey, yes, you can go adopt these things, you can explore these interesting products, and we know and we have a kind of guarantee in place that it's going to not only fit those requirements, but we can see what's going on so we can answer the questions of what happened, how is it actually being used, and is it following best practices. But really anything else would just be adding to Charlie's great answer there. So I'll pass it along.
Understood. And yeah, it's quite a balancing act. On the one hand, we don't want to restrict access to the data to the point where, we're not getting value out of it, but AI works fast, it loves data, and you can get it into trouble fast. So, these are important issues to figure out. Michael, anything you would like to add on this question?
Not so much. There's a couple things I guess I would add because, I think Eric and Charlie are spot on with what they're saying. And this is just the former DBA in me speaking out on this is like, to me, it's always important to have that rollback, right? Again, I know I'm biased. I work at a company that focuses on backup and recovery, but like, regardless of what happens, if you your AI models are always going to be based on the data you have. And if something happens to that data, you need to be able to roll back to a known good point and reestablish those models in the event of a disaster, right? You to use the CrowdStrike thing that happened, recently, right? It's hard to predict that was going to happen with all the various software interactions, but you need to have that ability to roll back quickly and reestablish yourself into a good working state. And I think that's important. When it comes to the security around this, we can create all the models, we can see how things are utilized. We always just need to make sure that, hey, if the worst happens, do we have a way to recover?
That's a great point as well. And Michael, since you went last on this first question of ours, I'm going to let you go first on this next one. In your view, what is the biggest security threat that organizations face today, particularly within the context of growing AI adoption?
Simply put, I think it's growing AI adoption, right? It's not just that we have these AI tools and we're using them and we're leveraging them, but that same tool can be turned against us. That the attackers themselves are going to be starting to use AI tools to simplify things, right? To make it easier to attack or create attack patterns, to deploy payloads, to find data. That's the other thing, right? It's not so much just about, hey, I want to get in and disrupt the company's business. It's also about exfiltrating that data and taking it somewhere and selling it to the highest bidder. So as much as like it's exciting to see these tools developed, right, there's almost a bit of an arms race going on where the people who are like, we're developing these tools to make things easier for us, and with a lot of the security tools, we're putting AI tools on top of that to make them easier to use, easier to implement, easier to be effective. But then again, like I said, that same tool can be used against us and damage us in ways that we may not be prepared for.
That's another great point, and I have seen some examples of nefarious uses of AI, in the media recently, and it's, I think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, and hopefully the good guys always stay a little bit ahead. Eric, I'm going to let you go next on this one. Would love your thoughts. What do you see as the biggest threat? AI in and of itself, or?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest selling points of AI for businesses is also one of the scariest, which is how much this is unlocking the ability for broader audiences, non-technical users, to start doing more work with data, with your organization's assets, and kind of making kind of more advanced requests around security. So most organizations have typically handled security in a kind of a role-based manner. These users are accessing this data under these purposes. These are the controls that we can have in place, right? Now you're going to see more end users that are empowered to find new use cases that the business has not thought about. And the nature of a lot of these AI programs is you don't always know exactly what's going on behind the scenes when those requests are made. So you need to have some kind of universal approach in place to put the controls in there, because you're not going to be able to plan out and assume in advance all the reasons why people are going to be accessing or making requests that might access customer data, confidential information, protected information in the organization. So that's I think what a lot of organizations are afraid of, and it's kind of stopping them from adopting AI in the first place.
Understood. Charlie, anything you'd like to add on this one?
I think they brought really good points. What I would like to add is the complexity of what we've been developing today, right? So the complexity of the models, also the complexity of the relationship between the data, the intricacy that we have as of today. So it does empower the companies, but for the other hand, it makes really hard for the humans, for the employees, to really understand what's being done, what's being developed, and the full power of what we're building, right? So, and that's dangerous, because we can go beyond what we do understand and break things in a way that we didn't understand how that went badly. And if you do not understand what we did wrong, so that would be things make really hard to fix things. Right, and to restore to a point that was safe before. So that complexity is something that makes me afraid, and especially because we do not have that many people that are able to explain in easy words how those things work, how the applications that are being built work. Right, so. And when we start doing those things, when nobody really understands what we are building, so we start having lack of accountability, because, well, that's complex. That's not on me. That's on AI. So I'm not accountable for those things. So if I do not have accountability, well, things can go really bad, right? And that's where we start going for those dark things that we have on the web. When we see all those deep fake automations, all those kind of things, is because people start lacking of accountability on things that they do not really understand. Right? So it's easy to build, like it's easy to use. It's really easy to use and easy to misbehave on those things. But at the end of the day, the majority of the people that are using those tools, they do not fully understand how those tools work. And that's really easy to make things go bad for the good and even for the good people. Like just break things because they do not have fully understanding on how those things work. I think that scares me a little bit.
Understood. Yeah, transparency and explainability are going to continue to be really important. And I'm just imagining scenarios where somebody's in a boardroom blaming it on the AI. It wasn't our fault; it's the AI's fault, and
exactly.
That obviously will not work. So.
Yep.
Eric, I'm going to let you go first on this next question. The question is, AI models often typically require large volumes of data. Some of that might include sensitive data. So how can organizations ensure compliance with data protection regulations while training AI models?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think even if you remove the AI component of it, this is something organizations have been struggling with for over a decade now, which is understanding what data they have where and take the next step. How is it being used, right? So in a perfect world where budget and processing power isn't an issue, you could buy a scanning-based solution, you could scan your environment all the time, and you'd be covered. But the reality is that's costly. Companies have to decide what intervals they want to scan on, what scope they want to scan, and there's always going to be windows in there where new sensitive data can enter the system. You don't know how it's being used, even if you know it's there. So you need a multi-tiered approach, really. I mean, those scanning-based solutions are critical for every organization. Satori has an approach where we play nicely in there, where it's kind of a database real time. So as people or applications are accessing data, we're also classifying that and applying policy on it. But I think the most important part is a people-based and a process-based, right? Is understanding how data is being entered into the system, putting rules in place and kind of having a common language around, hey, this is how we use this. This is the meaning of this data. So everyone's understood about that. And then when you are adopting AI technologies, I think the most we can do here is understand, okay, if we're going to connect these to these systems, what's the highest level of risk here, right? Let's say that, our controls aren't as good as possible. What's the scope that could potentially be resulting from this, and kind of work backwards from that. I wish there was an easy answer to it, but it really is a full organizational effort to stay on top of.
That's why it's an important discussion. If this was easy, it wouldn't be worth having a webinar on. Charlie, anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, that's indeed a complex topic. Like at Percona, every year we do have a recycling training on security, data access and responsibility, right? Because we need to remind ourselves that we are dealing with our customers' data. And sometimes people believe it's annoying, and it's going to what Eric just mentioned. We need to make sure people, they do understand not only the complexity, but they do understand how severe is to breach something, and how severe is to deal with someone else's data, right? And that's why we have so many regulations. And finding the defined point of utilizing well the data and not overgoing with the information that we have is a big point. I give you an example. Let's say you have your huge database that you need to do backups every day, right? And you need to process a lot of data every day. So your backup stays there, using space, doing nothing for years and years and years. And now all this AI thing came along. And people a nice guy just come to you and ask, man, why don't you use your backup to start training on model? It's just backup data. We're not going even to access your database. You're not dealing to your database, just using that data that's staying there, your resources that's being wasted to train this, and then you can start profiting on that thing. That looks amazing, right? The problem is we are giving away a really, really important resource that you might have there. And just because we don't know that data is unstructured, so how can we guarantee the access of that? The data won't be accessed or overdo the access for that data, the PII information right there. And as Eric mentioned, that goes more on the humans' ability of, as of for now, on okay, no, we have this limitation because once you put that on the AI model, the AI doesn't care. It doesn't know if that data is protected, if that data is not protected. So the person that is doing the categorization of the data needs to start preparing that data, right? So the challenge that I see today on how doing those things go beyond just, okay, doing anonymization. Okay, yeah, we need to do anonymization of data, but what data needs to be anonymized? What is the extent of that data, right? Oh no, I'm working with my customer. They have a crash on that database. I need to go to that database and get the database back. Well, do I really need to go to access that database and do a select or whatever table to that database? Or just need to go there, do whatever command on the box and to access that database, right? That level of understanding, okay, up to when can I go to solve the problems? That fine limit, as of today, is more on the humans than is on the process, on the process itself. And having really well-defined process, I think, is the best as we can as of today. But it's still, as just because of process, we don't have a physical barrier there that can still be breaching. And I think education in the companies as of today is the best way to go. We really need to give education like we do like every year. I myself need to go through again that train, which is boring. I need to see what I saw the last year and again and again and again. But yeah, if I don't do, I probably next time that I'm going to access my customer database, that you just need to start the database. Okay, you start the database. Let me take a look. Okay, how many tables do they have here? It's over what I have to do. Right? So I think we don't have good answers as for today, as Eric said, but I think education plays really long of what we need to do.
Absolutely. Michael, I have not forgot about you. Would love your input on this question as well.
I mean, I think the salient points have been covered by both Charlie and Eric. What I will I want to tag on to something that Charlie said. He said, okay, well, we need to educate people. I think we need to do a little bit more than that. I think the data people here need to learn how to sell. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times when we're talking about these vulnerabilities, these areas of compromise, the powers that be don't think about this until the cows have proverbially left the barn, right? That something bad has happened and now we have to recover from it, or we have to remediate it, or we have to do discovery about what got hit. So the goal or the target here is to get ahead of that. And that's where I think, folks on this call, folks listening into this, you need to learn how to talk to your management about, hey, this is a real problem. And how do we educate and take the lead on that? Like, this is a chance for data people to show leadership and say, this is how we can make things better for the future, like to solve the problem before it lands in our labs. And to me, that's really the crux of where this all comes together. It's all valid. It's all challenges, but we don't want to be dealing with it after the worst has happened.
That's a great point, Michael. Michael, I'm going to let you go next. Go first on this next question. So the question is: cyber resilience continues to gain prominence as a focus area for enterprises. How is the growth of AI impacting this? Are there pressing opportunities or challenges that you see out there?
I mean, so obviously this is very relevant for Rubrik, that we built our business on cyber resiliency. And to that point, we have our platform, we have a lot of the tools, a lot of things that we're talking about that can help customers recover quickly. And then we want to be able to enhance that with AI. AI is these are the automated tools that are going to make things easier, allow us to identify attacks quicker, to find the relevant bits of data, to do everything we're doing, we're going to be able to do it faster. And so, that's where that's really the immediate impact of the AI. And obviously there are opportunities, challenges around how do we best implement those AI tools. I think though, on top of that though, and this is an interesting thing with what we do, what I've seen internally at Rubrik. So internally at Rubrik, we actually have a quote AI council, if you will. I can't remember what their exact title is, but we have a group of people cross-functionally that look at the AI tools and make decisions on like what is the best way and what is the most ethical way, to be honest, of how do we implementing these AI tools in our environment and preparing for them. And so I think that's something that, we talk about getting ahead of issues, ahead of challenges. Companies need to start thinking about not only like what AI tools can we use, but how should we use them and what's the best way to use them in a way that is respectful of customers' data and also efficient and bringing the best value to the product.
Understood. Eric, would love your input on this.
Yeah, I think this question highlights well what I talk about when I mentioned guide rails around data usage and data-centric security. I think it's not realistic to think that your security team, your compliance team can think out and plan out every single use case around AI that the business is going to bring forward and want to adopt. So you need some way to have a baseline policy in place. So when you bring things on, you know that it's not going to be any massive violations. There's not going to be any massive hurdles that are going to shut down kind of your ability to operate, your ability to innovate quickly. With that, I think there's probably a lot that AI can actually bring into the topic of cyber resiliency, the ability to respond a lot faster, the ability to understand what's going on a lot faster. That's an area that I'm watching very closely and seeing kind of how organizations start to adopt AI to respond to a lot of this.
I like that. Using AI to combat, AI risks at the end of the day, but you're absolutely right. It's not a one-way street. Charlie, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, the answers that they gave are really good ones. I like the idea of having like model vulnerabilities, to be preemptive on attacks. And sometimes we are always looking to prevent that huge attack that's going to happen. Like, so let's say we have a website, and from out of the blue, we have dozens and thousands of access on that website, or someone wants to steal all our information. But sometimes we do forget the small leaking data that we may have in our application. So it reminds me the joke of the guy that worked in the bank, and he was a developer there, and then every day he was getting a few cents from every operation in his bank account, right? So, well, it's just 1 cent. Well, it's nothing, right? So, but if you have thousands of operations and every day, so eventually you're going to have a lot of money for that leakage. And sometimes this is what may be happening in our corporation, right? So it depends on the type of the data that we have. We don't need a huge leakage of data. We don't need a huge attack. Those are the ones that's really complex and difficult to find, because they do not impact on your system. We do not have that huge impact as if you have a ransomware or that huge attack, right? And using AI to model those things to see that small nuances, I think this is very powerful. And I think that we can definitely improve a lot to find, obviously, not only those small things, but then we can grow. It also goes for not only security, like improving database performance and all of these kind of things. I think we have a really huge tooling that we can improve in those areas as well.
Understood. Next question, Charlie, I'm going to let you kick us off. There's an old phrase, garbage in, garbage out. There are few, if any, organizations out there that are perfect when it comes to data quality and integrity. What needs to change for organizations to fully take advantage of AI and avoid the risks that come with that?
Well, I think that's the good question, right? So how can we best use our data to increase profit, right? So I think if you can summarize the data, is okay, we have this amount of data. How can we transform that amount of data in information? Usually when I'm delivering training about database and statistics, A phrase that I like to tell people is data is not the same thing as information. You might have 1 terabyte of data in your database and not even a byte of information in your hands, right? And we do not use data to make decisions. We use information to make decisions. If you go to the stock market, you don't care how many companies are in the stock market. If you have 1,000, 2,000, 1 million companies that are in the stock market, you want to know, based on the trend information, which the single one going to be the most profitable, so you can put your money on that one, right? So this is the difference about data. You have thousands of companies there, you have that huge amount of data, but the information that we're looking for is after processing all that data, then which is going to be the most profitable one, right? So, and it comes to one of our first question, understanding how all of those things work, right? So all of those models work. I think it's a huge deal. Today, when we're talking about AI, people are going to think about the large language model, LLM, that we use in ChatGPT or all those kind of things, because this is the trend, right? But AI goes way beyond those. Right? So we have AI being used to secure data on the bank to see if the transaction that you are doing now is real, it's safe, it's you doing that transaction, not someone trying to steal your money. Right? So banks are using those. And in a sort of way, the banks that have been using AI, if you call them AI, for decades, right? Even though it's hot now. So, and this is the point. Okay, what is my business? We first need to understand what is our core business. For a bank, understand if I'm having a honest transaction is way more important than typing a question here and giving a really amazing answer for a research on chemistry, right? So I think the first thing that we need to understand, okay, is what is my core business? Okay, I understand my core business. What is the data that I have? Okay, I know my core business. I know the data that I have. Now, what can I apply to transform that data to make value to my core business? And this is one of the major challenges that we have today, right? So, and in a lot of companies, they really do not understand their own core business. I've seen a lot of companies that they work in many different industries, and instead of putting a lot of money on their core business, they are now, let's hire more 10 developers here because we are building a new amazing system. Well, their core business is not build this system, right? So maybe when the people start to understand what they really need to, what their customer value the most, and that's the core business, okay, what my customer at Percona values the most. They value us because we're improve their database performance. We help them solving their database problem. So, okay. Now, I think that building a new language would be amazing because as a developer, I really like a new language. So is that part of my business now? Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a major point that we have today.
Absolutely. It can't just be technology for technology's sake. Michael, would love your views on, how can organizations really avoid the garbage in, garbage out dilemma, simply moved over to AI land versus, the other iterations of this,
So I don't know that it's avoidable, simply because, and to Charlie's point, right, there's just a lot of data, and the whole purpose of figuring out the information in that is finding out, because you just don't know all the time, what is garbage. And so that's sort of the iterative nature of what we do. It's, combing the data, filtering the data, training and retraining the models. And what Eric has mentioned a couple times, right, there's more of a people process in this than necessarily something we can build systems around, right? I think we just have to acknowledge, this is, we need to find ways to identify the good data over the bad data to call that into information, and what are the sort of the human guidelines that we're putting around to identify that, to leverage the tools, because the tools are just tools, right? A hammer doesn't know if it's pounding in a nail or a screw, it's just knowing it's getting swung. It's up to the human to say, okay, what's the appropriate use case for this? And is this the right data I should be working on? or do I filter it out for something else?
That's a great point, Michael. Eric would obviously love your input. And, if you'd like to talk a little bit, we talk a lot about technologies on these webinars, but obviously people play an equally important role. If you have anything you'd like to add there in terms of how organizations can create a better culture in terms of managing data responsibly and effectively, would love to hear that as well.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say, kind of blending these two, is I think the market has long had a big misunderstanding around what data quality is, and you can even extend that to data security, and believing that you could buy a solution that gives you that, right? I mean, when we talk about security, when we talk about governance, all of those are so contextual to what are you trying to do? What is the desired outcome? And, I think as Charlie was saying, what is the business's purpose, right? And what is the kind of the people in an organization, what are they driven to do? So I think when we talk about processes, when we talk about the people role in all of this, it's understanding that AI is not a magic bullet. It can't just connect to your data and then all of a sudden it's giving you answers that aren't there, and it's fixing data quality questions that you haven't been able to answer before. So I think it starts with kind of understanding we need to be able to connect to all of the resources we have, both from a data on our systems, but also the business domain knowledge of the teams that are using that data and producing that data, right? Understanding, hey, what is the purpose of this data? What should it look like so it can be consumed better? And how do we make sure that we're getting a complete picture of all of the assets together, right? I think from a security standpoint, I see a lot of organizations that want to say, hey, if we can't answer these questions around PII data, financial data, let's just not connect it. Let's not make it accessible. But then back on the other point, you're creating a data quality issue. You're hurting the completeness of data in your organization. So you need to answer these questions. You need to assign ownership of data beyond just technology teams and security teams that don't understand how that data is being used, where it's coming from, and the purpose for it.
Understood. Eric, I'm going to let you go first on our last question for today. I think we have time for one more. We're getting close to the top of the hour. So first, looking ahead, what new trends or developments have you most excited? And just to add on to that, if there's one thing you'd really like our viewers today to walk away keeping in mind, what would that be?
Yeah. So what I'm most excited for, I mentioned this a number of times, is how typical business teams that are not technical, that haven't been engaging with data a lot, are now enabled to work with that to answer new questions, to kind of move a lot faster in their job. Obviously, we need to answer the questions of how do we enable that? How do we not, hurt our customers by leaking their data, hurt our business by running into compliance fines? But I think overall, this is going to be a better thing. Companies are going to be able to provide better products. They're going to be able to compete more in the market. And really, just on that, what you got to think about is what I keep saying is you need guidelines in place. Guidelines help us move faster. They keep the business safe. They kind of allow people to focus on the fun part of their job and not the less fun part, like dealing with privacy concerns, breaches, that kind of stuff.
It's great advice. Okay, Michael, how about you?
It's interesting because as I think about this, like the answer to me is it almost feels like the answer that I should have given 15 years ago. And the reason I say that is because I see like it's the cloud. And the reason I say the cloud is we seem to have reached a maturity point with the cloud where a lot, like for so many years, right, things seem to be like half-baked and like it sort of worked and stuff would go down in certain regions and it always seemed to be a little bit haphazard. But we've reached a maturity point where the cloud platform is now a reliable part of enterprises' architectures, so they can make more and more use of that. And that means now we can start to make use of these like scalable solutions. So things like Cosmos DB, right, in Azure. I don't know if it's still called that or not. I think it might be Data Fabric. But right, we have these solutions that are designed to now scale out in much larger ways. And what that means is now we have more processing power for data, right? For going and using these AI tools and doing more and more at faster rates. And so I guess that's just the thing, right? It's just watching that sort of maturity grow and bloom and see how we can leverage it, to also Eric's point about making that, democratizing it in a way, right? Giving people the tools to make it easier to access and leverage that data, leverage those tools, and just to continue to see that evolution. It's really exciting.
Absolutely. Charlie, last but not least.
Yeah, no, I tend to say that we build AI to help people, not people to help AI, right? So in that sense, one thing that makes my eyes blink is automation that you can get with all of those things. Right? The level of automation that you can have, level of automation in research, for example. Let's talk about healthcare and biotechnology. So you can model something to start doing review the DNA and to find the differences and all the similarities to see what's next, what new drug or new disease or whatever can we find, right? If we go to social, for example, we're helping to develop a project here that we need to separate plastic caps for recycling. So instead of having a lot of children and people doing that manually, so you have some computer vision to do that for you, and then they can spend their time doing something else and something that's less risky, right? So I think, as people said, as Eric said, democratizing those things is something that really makes me happy on that we can use AI for as of today.
Thank you to our speakers today for coming on board and sharing their insights and expertise. Once again, Charlie Batista, PostgreSQL Tech Lead at Percona, Eric Shepfley, Data Enablement Solutions at Satori, and Michael Fall, Database Practice Lead at Rubrik. So if you in attendance today would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, you can use the same URL that you used for today's live event. It will be archived and you will receive an email once the archive is posted. And if you would like a PDF of the deck, you can go to the handout section once that archive is live. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks everybody.